It's great. Exodus, of course, the book of Genesis ends on a high note, right? Joseph's family, there's the big reunion, and they're there in Egypt, and it's happy, and things seem to be going well. And when we read the beginning of Exodus, there's a turn, though, right? So Exodus 1, it says, Joseph died, all his brothers, and all that generation. But the descendants of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They grew exceedingly strong so that the land was filled with them. This is a fulfillment, first of all, of God's command in Genesis to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. Abraham is to be the father of a great nation. It's happening. They're having children. They're having grandchildren. It's going on, so that's great. But, verse 8, there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. We don't know exactly how much time had passed, but some time has passed. Didn't remember this guy Joseph who had saved the country during the famine. He said to his people, behold, the people of Israel too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them. So Egypt. Lisa and I are going to Egypt. I've never actually been there somehow. We're going in January and waiting all our lives to go to Egypt, which is exciting. We can't be positive which Pharaoh was that new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Most scholars think that it was Ramses II, called Ramses the Great. He's called the Great because he had the longest reign, he had the most powerful reign, he had the wealthiest reign. He was amazing. I kind of like that, by the way. I can't prove this. I love the fact that the Israelites escaped during the reign of the greatest of the pharaohs. Like, didn't wait till they had like a weenie pharaoh who had things out of control, and then they sneaked out when nobody was looking. Same thing with when Jesus was born. Jesus was born under the Emperor Augustus, the greatest of all the Roman emperors. The Bible doesn't say this, but I think it's sort of a statement like, okay, even the most powerful, that's when we come. That's whom we are encountering. I love that. I read a biography fairly recently about Ramses, and a great builder. Look forward to going to Egypt, seeing all of his temples and monuments. This is Abu Simbel, which is in the far south of Egypt. What they've learned about Ramses is his name is on a lot of monuments, but they weren't really his monuments. So his predecessors had names on their monuments, and he wiped off their names and put his name. Over and over and over. The other thing that they learned is that his brag always, early in his reign and throughout his reign, was, when I was a young king, I went to Kadesh and crushed our foes. And people thought, they thought he was great. Big military victory. They now have found manuscripts and archaeology and have studied that Battle of Kadesh, and it turns out it was a draw. But who could know back in Egypt, right? You didn't have TV coverage, just his propaganda people came and said, oh, it was a great victory. And people bought into that for a long time. Interesting, right? How the powers, they're never quite all that they're cracked up to be. The Bible is at pains, how shall I put it, to poke fun at the powerful, right? Because the Bible's not about we're going to fawn over the people that are powerful in the world. The Bible pokes fun at them, even though Israel's always smaller, even though Jesus and the disciples and the Christians are always kind of the weak guys out. God's the true story with them, and the powers that be, that's just a temporary thing. That's not really the be-all and the end-all. Certainly happens with Pharaoh. Pharaoh's building pyramids, and the Israelites are slave, and I love the phrase. It says, Pharaoh says, come, the people are too many, too mighty for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war befall us, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land, which is precisely what they're going to do. It's the let us deal shrewdly with them. Now, they actually, we have records of this brick making for the pyramids. If you look at those pyramids and ponder them for a while, they are enormous slave labor making all of that happen. Millions of bricks that slaves produced. They found a leather scroll from the time of Ramses, and it was sort of the daily work orders for the brick makers. And if I could read this scroll, I can't read that. but I trust those who can. They say they're talking about one particular brick maker, and his daily quota was to be 2,000 bricks. That's a lot of bricks. You got to stay really busy all day long. It's grinding labor, and there wasn't a day off. The Israelites, when they were slaves, making bricks, they worked 7 days a week. There's actually a fairly new book out by Walter Brueggemann, who's this great Old Testament scholar. He gave me a podcast a while back. He's usually very grouchy, and he was in a great mood that day. It was fun. We had a good time. In his book, one of the things that he points out is that the Israelites had a unique culture in that there was always in Israelite theology a provision for a day of rest, right? One of the 10 Commandments. People want to post the 10 Commandments in public places. They don't actually want to adhere to the 10 Commandments, but they think they should be posted. And one of them is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. On that day, you won't do work, you won't cause anybody else to work, and so on. What Brueggemann points out is that in the culture of Pharaoh, and he thinks this has become our culture, you can never actually rest. Your work is never done. There's never enough. You must always produce more. You must always do more. But in Israel's world, there's a day of rest. It is enough. You don't have to be more and more productive. It's really interesting. The other thing that happens is, of course, he says, let's deal shrewdly with them. And the joke is that they're anything but shrewd. Pharaoh makes 2 mistakes. He gets annoyed with Moses later on and says, I'm so angry at Moses and these Israelites. Let them make bricks without straw. Is that a shrewd decision? And why is it not a shrewd decision? You're going to make lousier bricks, right? So he appears to be being a tough guy, but he's actually doing something that's detrimental even to himself. And then he makes the decision to do what? To kill the boys when they are born? Is that a shrewd decision if you have slaves who are building for you? They're the labor supply, right? So he's not dealing shrewdly. The Bible's poking fun at him for doing such a thing. I love the little incident in Exodus toward the end of chapter 1, and it's just worth reading because there's humor in it. The king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah. I'm still waiting to baptize a Shiphrah or a Puah. Shiphrah means lovely, and Puah means little flower. Like great names. He says to them, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women, and you see them upon the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and let the male children live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous and are delivered before the midwife even shows up. It's like sass, right? No respect for the Pharaoh, and he's kind of dissing, and they're kind of dissing the Egyptian women. The Egyptian women need midwives, but the Israelite women are so strong, they just deliver it before we even get there. It's a lie, but it's a lie in the interest of saving the people. I love all of that. Jonathan Sacks, in commenting on this, he calls them history's first civil disobedience, right? The law was you're to kill the children. They refused to kill the children. And as he put it, a lot of times saying, I was just obeying orders is no defense. This happens so many times in history. I've been reading recently about Nazi Germany, and the defense always was, I was just obeying orders. And Sacks, he's Jewish. He's got to be thinking about this. Saying I was just obeying orders is not a defense. Cool thing happens in Exodus chapter 2. The boys are being saved against Pharaoh's will. A man from the house of Levi went and took to wife a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a goodly child, she hid him for 3 months. I've just pondered that forever. He must have been a really good child to hide him for 3 months. What do babies do that would make them hard to hide? They scream, but he was a goodly child. She hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes, daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds at the river's brink. His sister stood at a distance. This is Miriam, greatest babysitter in history, I like to call her, to know what would happen to him. It floats down the river. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. Her maidens were beside the river. She saw the basket. She fetched it. She opened it and saw the child. And the child was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." His sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter says, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. This is amazing, right? So Jochebed, Moses' mother, can't hide him any longer. So she's afraid that he'll be killed. So she puts him in this basket and just sends it down the river. It's like cast your bread upon the waters. Does she know where that basket will go? She has no idea. It's the Nile. It could flow all the way out into the Mediterranean, but she can't keep him here. So she just takes a chance against chance. She hopes against hope that something will happen. The Pharaoh's daughter happens to come down. This Pharaoh, by the way, we know from records, had 59 daughters. Many wives, of course. 59 daughters, and we don't know the name of this one, but typically they call her Bitya, which that's a nickname that stuck to her for a while. She happens to come down to the river at the right time. Did God cause her to need to come down at just the right time? Was it just chance? The story doesn't say. And then she fetches the child. She realizes it's a Hebrew child and wants to save the child. What does that require on her part? It requires courage. It requires, her father is the one who said, "The Hebrew boys shall die." So she's risking her place in the family, all of this. It's amazing. And then she realizes, since it's not her child, she needs a midwife. Miriam, best babysitter ever, has been lurking around and says, "Can you find a midwife?" And it's Moses' mother. It's just too good to be true, right? So they all get to live in the palace. A cool thing about this, slight advantage if you can read Hebrew, is when it says, when she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes. The word translated basket there is not the usual Hebrew word for basket. The word that is translated basket there is teva, T-E-V-A-H, teva. The word teva occurs only one other time in the Bible, and that is the word that is used to describe Noah's Ark. Now, what does the basket that Moses is in and Noah's Ark, what do they have in common? They don't have sails, they don't have a motor, there's no rudder. The ark goes where the ark goes. Moses' basket goes where it goes. Although there's kind of a wink, is God actually nudging this thing along? Doesn't say. And I love that it doesn't say, right? Because that's how we actually experience our lives. What's God doing? Not sure. Is God behind the curtains? Maybe. We hope, we look. So the ark, I love that, the teva. It's a neat thing. Moses grows up, and various things happen that we could go into, but in Exodus chapter 3, we come to Moses' call. Moses, he's escaped Egypt. He saw a fight. He killed an Egyptian. That's terrible. So he has to flee the land, winds up in the land of Midian. And he's out one day. He's not praying. He's not seeking God's will. He's not asking, "God, what do you want me to do with the rest of my life?" He's there with Jethro, his father-in-law. He's got a wife there. But he's out one day, and he sees a bush that is burning, and it is not consumed. My very first paper in divinity school was on Exodus chapter 3. I found it the other day and looked through it just to get ready for today. And it was frightfully dull. but just paper. Anyway, but I thought a lot about this passage, and it's cool. Different things happen in the story. This is, of course, from the 50s movie, The Ten Commandments, with Charlton Heston, which is super interesting. And by the way, when in the movie, when this happens, so Moses goes up, has dark hair when he goes up on the mountain that day, and he has the experience of God at the burning bush, and when he comes back down, he looks like this. And it's one of those moments in a movie that, you know, in the 50s when people saw it, they were very moved by it, and today, I don't know, to me it seems funny. So what's funny there is his wife is waiting, Zipporah is waiting for him to come down there with Joshua, and then Moses comes down the mountain, and his hair is white. And her first comment to him is, she says, "Moses, your hair." I don't know why that's funny to me. The image that Cecil B. DeMille is creating is, if you're in the presence of God, it's almost radioactive or something, like it'll discolor your hair. I don't think we need to do that. What's more serious is that God speaks. So in Exodus 3, when the Lord saw that Moses turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." God said, "Do not come near. Put off your shoes from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob." Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord God said, "I have seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring forth my people." If I'm Moses at this point, I would have said, "You just said you were going to deliver the people." But what God's implying here is, I'm going to deliver the people, and you are going to be the one that I will use to deliver my people, which will require on Moses' part what? A tremendous amount of courage, lest we forget he grew up in Pharaoh's household. He has people that he grew up with who are now officials in Egypt. Plus it's Pharaoh, and he's going to ask them to let the slave labor go. "Come, I'll send you to Pharaoh." Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt?" But God says, "I will be with you." Later, Moses said, I'm a man of slow speech. The idea has always been that Moses stuttered. The text doesn't actually say that he stuttered. He just says, I'm not a good speaker. You're asking me to go negotiate with the Pharaoh? I mean, he might have stuttered, but we don't know that. He says that he's slow of speech. There's a pattern in this call narrative. This is what I discovered in my paper that I had not noticed in the Bible before. Is God says to Moses, "I'm calling you to do something." And Moses responds by saying, "I can't do this for the following reason," right? And then God says, "Doesn't matter. I'm going to use you anyway." This happens over and over in the Bible. God calls Jeremiah, and Jeremiah says, "I'm too young." God calls Isaiah, and Isaiah says, "I'm not holy enough." God calls Jonah to go preach to the Assyrians. His excuse is actually different. It's like, the Assyrians aren't worth preaching to. God comes to Mary and says, "I want you to be the mother of the Son of God." And she says, "How can I be a mother? I've never been with a man," right? So everybody's got a good reason that God can't use them, and then God says, "I'm going to use you anyway." And the good line in my paper that I figured out was to say, God is not looking for ability, God is looking for availability. I was 20 years old, and I thought, I was so proud. The rest of the paper was frightfully boring. I'm reminded of a lot of, Exodus, it's a good book, and then it's got some weird stuff too. And always in the Bible, we say that there's the stories that are too ugly to be true, the things in the Bible that you think, why is this in the Bible? Genesis, we had so much of that, dysfunctional people, dysfunctional families. Exodus is a little bit better, but then you get odd things, and there's a curious verse. I've had people come to me with their Bible before and ask about this. Toward the end of Exodus chapter 4, there's a verse 24 that says, God was trying to kill Moses, which really puzzles people, right? Like, why would God want to kill Moses? And then even more profound thinking, people think, if God was trying to kill Moses, do you think God could pull it off? Because it's God, after all. So what is that about? And we don't know what that is about. It's the kind of thing that's in the Bible. One, I think it reminds us that what we're reading about in the Bible is not dictation from heaven where God is saying, do this, do this, do this, believe this, believe this, believe this. These are stories of people and their experience of God. I would have no doubt that Moses, at quite a few points in his life, if you take the whole story at face value, would have thought, God, you're trying to kill me. I'm sure he probably felt that way any number of times. So it's not that God was trying to kill Moses, but it had to feel that way to Moses. Who knows these things? We come to, I'll skip that. We'll come to the Pharaoh. There's Yul Brynner. I mean, he just looks like the Pharaoh, doesn't he? Anyway, I love that. Yul Brynner in the Ten Commandments. Played that so well. And the interesting scenes in the Ten Commandments movie has to do with the plagues, right? Moses goes and he works a miracle, and then Pharaoh's guys match it, and pretty soon you got locusts that are coming down, and the waters turn to blood. Just one hail comes. It was just one plague after another, and then finally it's the death of the firstborn. So it's like it seems like God's wearing Pharaoh down. What's interesting theologically is that the Bible says this pretty clearly, is that the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. And you hear that and you think, oh my gosh, God hardened his heart so that he wouldn't let the people, what was that about? Nahum Sarna, who's a Jewish scholar, was the first person that I read that pointed out that in the sequence of the plagues, for the first 5, whatever it is that happens, it doesn't say then that the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. At that point it says, and Pharaoh hardened his heart, right? So something happens. The implication is he should let the people go, but Pharaoh hardened his heart. No, I will not let them go. I will keep my labor supply. You can't tell me what to do. So he hardens his heart. And then in the latter plagues it says, and the Lord hardened his heart. So what Sarna wants to do with this is that God is giving Pharaoh every good chance to soften his heart and to hear what he should do and let the people go. But then once he doesn't, then God hardens his heart. You have this thing in the New Testament, right? In Romans chapter 1, it talks about people's sinfulness and God pleading with them not to sin. But then it says, and God gave them up to the passions of their heart, right? If that's what you want to be, if you want to be stuck in that, I will leave you stuck in that. Jonathan Sachs talks about this hardening. Let me read a little bit here to you. Yeah. So he talks about the hardening of the heart and how it gradually changes and becomes stronger and stronger, and finally God giving them up. He says, evil traps the evildoer in its mesh. Slowly but surely, he or she loses freedom and becomes not evil's master, but its slave, which that's super interesting on the next page. The belief that freedom is an all or nothing phenomenon blinds us to the fact that there are degrees of freedom. It can be won and lost. So what he's saying is that Pharaoh was free, but after a while, one bad decision after another, you actually squander and sacrifice that freedom, and you become habituated. It becomes habit to you to make the bad decisions. Witness 1,000 things in the world where that sort of thing happens. God comes, delivers the Israelites through the sea. If you ever took a Religion 101 course, one of the big revelations is that in the Bible translations, we don't know why, it says that God delivered them through the Red Sea. And the Red Sea, you can find it on the map today. It's where the Houthis and all are having all the stuff that's going on over there now. What a disaster. God delivered them through the Red Sea. That would be amazing, the kind of thing to see in the Charlton Heston movie. What the Hebrew actually says, though, I remember hearing this in college. I'm sitting next to my closest lifelong friend, and I remember when the professor said this to us. Carl wrote, instead of Religion 101 on the cover of his notebook, he crossed that out in this moment and wrote Heresy 101. So his reaction was, this is heresy. My reaction was, this is so interesting. Anyway, the Hebrew that gets mistranslated Red Sea is Yam Suf. Yam is a sea, Suf is reeds. The sea of reeds. God delivered them through the sea of reeds. I can't say that this is the sea of reeds, but there are a lot of bodies of water in Egypt to this day that are like this. There's water, it's marshy, there are reeds. Does this minimize the miracle? Well, in my friend Carl's view, he could be watching this video. That's okay. We talk about these things sometimes. Does this minimize the miracle? And for me, the answer clearly is no. And the reason is, when the Israelites escaped, this looks like a place that you couldn't just get through all that easily. And the most important fact is Pharaoh had guards around all of his borders, but this was an unguarded place where they escaped. So the Pharaoh hadn't bothered to guard there, so it seemed like an impassable place. Anyway, they're delivered through the sea of reeds. A lot of other interesting things. This is Pharaoh Ramses' mummy. It's kind of fascinating, these things that they find. And then here's one of Ramses' statues crumbled to the ground, which may remind you, if you remember this from school days. Percy Bysshe Shelley wrote a poem called Ozymandias. Do you remember learning Ozymandias in school? It's been a while, of course. So Shelley wrote this poem, and he is pondering one of Ramses' crumbled statues. I'll just read it to you because it's theologically wise, I think. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, the heart that fed." And on the pedestal these words appear. "My name is Ozymandias," that's the Greek form of Ramses, "King of kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sand stretched far away." I just love that it's so profound, Ramses and his might and his power, and this is what remains. Beautifully said. I got to watch my time. The Israelites go out in the wilderness, and they find their way to Mount Sinai. This is pretty important. I love that in the Charlton Heston movie, the Cecil B. DeMille 10 Commandments movie, when you watch Moses talking to Ramses, Heston talking to Yul Brynner, and you kind of read between the lines and the themes, the feel of it is that whom should Americans identify with in the story? And the answer is the Israelites. And the story is all about freedom. Americans are the people that are free, and they're escaping. This is the 50s, right? So who's the evil empire that we wish to be free from? This would be the Soviet Union, right? The big communist threat. That's kind of the subtext during the movie. The freedom is pretty interesting. Because God sets Israel free. I've said this in sermons a number of times. God did not set them free so that they could go live in an island and do what they wanted to do for the rest of their lives. God sets Israel free so that they can go where? To Mount Sinai. What's going to happen at Mount Sinai? It's not a little mountain chalet vacation. They go to Mount Sinai so that Moses can go up and receive all of God's commandments to come down and tell the Israelites how to live. That's what the freedom is for. And what the commandments, therefore, are for is God has set the people free, and at Mount Sinai, God shows them how to remain free or warns them of ways that they might lose their freedom. So freedom in the Bible, tell you this over and over, it's not freedom American style. Freedom American style is I can do what I want. I'm free to do whatever I want. It's a bit of a fiction, because we're creatures of habit. We kind of follow along with the culture. But in the Bible, freedom isn't, I'm free to do what I want to do. Freedom in the Bible is God has set you free to do God's will. God has set you free to be a child of God. God has set you free to exhibit the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness. God has set you free to do the things that Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount and many other places. They're out in the wilderness. They're on their way to Mount Sinai. There's so much we could cover here, but I'll just mention this. Chapter 16, they've just been set free from years of servitude under the Pharaoh. And they're just new out in the wilderness. And the whole congregation of the people of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." They've just been set free and they're whining. It was better back in Egypt. Somebody years ago said it was easier to take the Israelites out of Egypt than to take Egypt out of the Israelites. There's kind of this human tendency. We always prefer this old two-bit life that is familiar to us than the hard work that it might take to embrace a new life. They complain, Exodus 16, long passage, super interesting. They complain, you expect God might rain down lightning on them, but they're hungry and God rains down what? Manna on them. It's bread from heaven. Oh, there's Moses with the commandments. I'll get back to that in a minute. God rains down manna on them. There's a phenomenon in the Sinai desert that's pretty interesting. There are a scattering all over the desert of tamarisk trees, and they have a sap that grows in the tree, and there are insects that come and they suck off that sap, and then they deposit it on the ground, and it hardens over time, and it forms items that look like this that are rich in protein and that you can pick up and eat. So there's manna. So this would again cause my friend to say, Heresy 101. I'm not much troubled by that. How did God provide food? Could it not have been through the tamarisk tree that they knew nothing about and these insects? It's kind of an almost miraculous process. There is food for them in the wilderness. Fascinating. They eat manna day after day after day. They finally come to Mount Sinai. God gives them the laws. There's Heston holding the commandments. What I love about the receiving of the laws is in Exodus chapter 19, Moses goes up on the mountain, and he comes down and he calls some of the elders together and says, God's called me up on the mountain. He's going to give me a lot of commandments. Tell the people. So Exodus 19:7. Moses came, called the elders of the people, set before them all the words. And the people answered together, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. What's funny at that point is they don't know what the Lord has spoken, right? Like whatever the God says, we will do it, which is actually a good plan. I read one commentator said, they should have had an attorney who said, let's read the fine print first before we commit to this. But the idea is these aren't timeless commands. These are words from the God who had delivered them from Egypt. Right? So they have good cause to say, whatever the Lord commands, we will do. The 10 Commandments come, we know these things. You shall have no other gods, you shall not kill, you shall not steal, shall not covet, all of these things. I don't mean to be persnickety about the posting of the 10 Commandments in public places. I would not mind if the 10 Commandments were posted lots of places. I'm not sure, this is just James Howell's thoughts, not even your pastor's thoughts. I'm not sure how much that would actually help. If somebody is filled with lust over a woman that he's met at work, would his driving home one day, would he see those 10 Commandments and say, oh, thou shalt not commit adultery? Oh, right? Or you have somebody, a mass shooter, who'd be on the way to a mass shooting, but would see thou shalt not kill. And they would go, oh, I'll go back home. Maybe, who knows? I'm more interested of our lack of interest in the content of the commandments, and we can just take a few. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. I grew up when I was with my grandparents. I kind of hated Sundays because they observed the Sabbath day very rigorously. So it was like no TV, no fun, no dessert. It was like the worst day of the week. And I hated Sunday. And that's not what it's about. I did a program here a while back. A few of you may have been there, but we got it on videotape. Rabbi Murray Esring and I did a program on the Sabbath in Judaism and Christianity. And what he points out is that for Jews, on the Sabbath, it's not that you don't do anything. On the Sabbath, you don't do what you normally do during the week. Whatever it is the grind, the labor that you do all the time. You do not do that on Sunday. You put that away for some stillness and some quiet, some time with God, but then also you do whatever it is that your heart delights. If you enjoy tinkering on old cars, you can't do that all week because you got to go to work and then you got to do your chores. But on the Sabbath, you tinker with your old car. Maybe you enjoy painting. On the Sabbath, you paint. When Murray was here, he said, "You have sex on the Sabbath." That made people blush, you know. So it's not a day of doing nothing, but it's a day that for us is pretty much like another day. And we've lost that sense of there being a sacred day, and we've lost the sense of there being a sacred day. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, if you can set apart one day as a day that is sacred, then you begin to understand how all the days are sacred. See how that works? So we've lost that. You shall not covet. I mean, that's just the engine of capitalism is coveting. If we didn't have coveting, you couldn't have capitalism, because capitalism says you don't have enough, you need to buy more, you need to buy newer. You should want the thing that you do not have, and so on. Anyway, Ten Commandments. Martin Luther, I think, spoke especially wisely about the Ten Commandments. He says it's wrong to think of these as rules. He said we should think of them as promises. How is it a promise? Well, there are a lot of ways it could be a promise. You shall have no other gods. That's not God saying, don't you dare bow down and worship another God. What it is God's making a promise that you don't need other gods. You don't need to look elsewhere for your life, for your hope. I am enough of a God. I am the true God. I am the God who is always with you and giving you life and joy and peace. The commandment says you shall not kill. Most think, well, I've never actually killed anybody. But Jesus messes with that, right? So Jesus says, you've heard it said, you shall not kill. But I say to you, if you have harbored anger in your heart, goodness gracious, like this is garden variety being an American during an election year. Like everybody's angry. Try to drive down the road. The person in the car next to you is doing whatever. A different finger that comes out, isn't it? Anger is just so justified in our society. And people even feel like if you're righteous and close to God, you're justified in your anger and rage. Jesus says if you harbor anger in your heart, you're guilty of that. Luther would say the promise in it is like you don't have to get mad. You don't have to be angry. You can be at peace. You can be humble. You can love. I'm showing you a better way. You shall not covet. You know, the promise in it is you don't have to covet. You don't have to want more. You don't have to want newer. You don't want to have what those guys have. You don't have to look at Facebook and think, everybody else is so happy, I wish I were like them. You are enough. You have enough. You can be content. That's the beauty of the promise there. Let me touch on, what time is it? I can't hear any of you. Oh, we're great. So I want to look at Exodus chapter 32, which is a passage that I love dearly, although it has a terrible ending. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, and the people are down in the valley. And I just love the way this whole passage is worded. It's absolutely splendid. Exodus chapter 32, verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, right? So they're presuming like he's delaying up there. Well, he's not delaying up there. What is he doing? He's listening to God. And however long God talks, that's the time that he should spend there. But he's delaying coming down. The people gathered themselves together to Aaron, this is Moses' brother, and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us." Beginning of idolatry. As for, I love these little words, as for this Moses, they would think, as for our beloved Moses, but they as for this, like this guy, Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold, which are in the ears of your wives, your sons." You got men with earrings there, right? "Take off the rings of gold, which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me." Question, if you know this, you get an A+ for the semester. These are slaves who just escaped from Egypt. How do they have rings of gold? What?
They stole them from the Egyptians when they left.
They did not steal them. Danny, that's close. It's a curious little episode that nobody notices. So the Egyptians, they're ground down from all of the plagues, right? So they're like, "Ew." So right before they leave, the Israelites go to the wealthy Egyptians around them and say, "Give us some of your valuables," and they do. Now, the question is, what's the gold for? It is not. The Israelite women and men deserve some lovely gold jewelry for all of their trouble. No. They get the gold. There's a purpose for the gold. They're going to learn what that purpose is at Mount Sinai, and what is it? One of the things that God tells Moses on Mount Sinai is, "You shall build a tabernacle, and it shall be outfitted in elegant fabric and in gold and other precious gems." So they get those from the Egyptians because they're to be part of the building of the tabernacle. Instead, the people come together and they pool all of that to create an idol. Artistic things, they create the golden bull. It's a common idol in the ancient Near East. And if you think about it, why would they do a golden bull? Gold implies what? Wealth and success and all of that. What does the bull convey? It's kind of strength, but also potency. I don't have the right word for it. All of those things. And that's the kind of God that everybody in the ancient world wanted. They had them in Egypt. They're golden bulls all over the place. We've excavated a bunch of them. Other people, they had golden bulls. They're just like, we want that kind of God that will be strong and powerful. If you go to New York City, there's a golden bull on Wall Street. Same thing, kind of, right? In a way. Anyhow. So anyway, back to the story. "Take the rings of gold, which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of gold, which were in their ears, brought them to Aaron. He received the gold at their hand, fashioned it with a graving tool, and made a molten calf, and said, "Here are your gods, O Israel." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. "Tomorrow shall be a feast day to the Lord." They rose early in the morning to eat and to drink, and they rose up to play. So that's what's going on down in the valley. This is one of the funniest passages of the whole Bible. Verse 7, the Lord and Moses are up on the mountain. The Lord looks down and says, "Moses, go down, for your people," not my people or the people, but your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt. Like, God's disowning them, right? Because they're doing this. God's distancing. "Go down, Moses, for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They've turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They've made for themselves a molten calf," and so on. I've seen this people, they are stiff-necked. Let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. But of you I will still make a great nation. Moses responds to the Lord and said, oh, Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought forth out of the land of Egypt? It's absolutely amazing. They're your people. No, those are your people who did this. So Moses pleads on behalf of the Israelites. God intends to destroy them. In verse 14, the Lord repented of the evil which he thought to do to his people. One of those great theological questions we could throw around for a while is, does the Lord change his mind? And philosophically, you could say that God can't change his mind because, it's God. God's infinite, ineffable, omniscient, all those omni words. In the Bible, God changes God's mind all the time. And it often is in response to the prayers, the pleas of people. That's like a biblical thing. The story gets funnier. Moses comes down the mountain, verse 21. Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought a great sin upon them? Aaron said, let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know these people, that they are set on evil, right? So Aaron's like, not me. It's like, you know how they are. They're set on evil. They said to me, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. I said to them, let any who have gold take it off. And they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. It's just too rich. Out came this calf. Jonathan Sacks says the sort of primary sin that all sins have in common for him is a failure to take responsibility. These people, you know how they are. I threw it in, but out came. It's an absolutely fabulous story. Then at the end, as one of our Eagle Eye readers pointed out to me in an email this morning, that seems to be the end of the story. God has mercy, but then they have this bizarre thing where the Levites come together and 3,000 of them wind up getting slaughtered that day. Seems to be a divine punishment. One commentator pointed out, you have 600,000 people, only 3,000 of them got killed, so you still got 597,000 that are left. Well, it's 3,000 people who got killed. The Bible does this stuff, right, where there's killing, and it seems to be in God's name, and we read it, and we say, well, it must be God's will to kill, and people have used that in wars, all kinds of places. But as I've said before, my read on genocide and this kind of mass killing in the Bible is that people, the writers of the Bible, thought God wanted them to do these things, but they were incorrect. But it's in the Bible so that when we see it, we'll be appalled by it. Not because we are sensitive, really smart people. We are appalled by it because of what we know from everything else in the rest of the Bible. Everything else in the rest of the Bible leads you to believe, like, you just don't go slaughter people like this, right? So we know that that's actually wrong. So when we read it and we're like, oh, this is so wrong, that's exactly how God wants us to read that. A couple of other things. Exodus 33, Moses is back up on the mountain and talking to God face to face. They redo the commandments and so on. The Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. And it says that Moses' face after being with God was shining, the face of Moses shining. In the history of art, including, so this is Michelangelo's Moses statue in St. Peter's and Chains Church in Rome. Fabulous statue. It's huge. Michelangelo depicted Moses with horns. He was not the first to do so. That had gone on for decades and centuries, Moses being depicted with horns. There are two reads on that are pretty important. First of all, when Exodus says that Moses' face was shining, the verb that is translated shining is just one little away from the word that means had horns. So when the Bible translators came to translate the Bible into Latin, they weren't very good at Hebrew. They didn't know the meaning of the one little squiggle, so they thought it said, well, Moses had horns. So they said in the Latin Vulgate, Moses had horns. And it's not necessarily derogatory, right? The horn image could mean he was strong, he was powerful, he was potent. But pretty much through the Middle Ages, it came to stand for he was demonic. He was like a horned creature. Michelangelo does this. I found a thing that's in my newest book that I love. I was reading an art historian talking about Michelangelo and his crafting of this statue. And let me find this real quickly, and then we'll be done. Oh, yeah. So I'll read to you for a moment. Pope Julius hired Michelangelo to build his tomb with Moses, but it took Moses more than 3 decades to finish it. He was always perfecting it. He was distracted by other work, like the Sistine Chapel. He had to interrupt this for a while to do the Sistine Chapel. He chipped at the marble in his workshop near St. Peter's, which was his home where he lived. So the statue of Moses was in Michelangelo's house. Art historian William Wallace explains that Michelangelo lived with Moses. The two grew old together. Every morning, the artist woke up with Moses. Every time he returned home, he was welcomed by the same imposing figure. To live with Moses could be unnerving. Like, I love that. Like, he lived with Moses, this big imposing figure. I love that. And one other little thing. Wallace humorously envisions the day that they moved the massive statue 3 miles from Michelangelo's home to the church where it's now has. So he pictures this. Like, all these guys come, there's a massive cart, they put the statue in it. A few astonished persons stood gaping at Moses, peering over the side of a rude cart, rolling through the streets of Rome. Like Moses rolling down the street. But I love that idea of living with Moses, which is something. There's much more that we could say. I think I'll wind up with that. Exodus just has so many treasures, and we could spend a lot of time, as we did with 32, on any number of these texts. But anyhow, those are some things that I lately have found to be very interesting about Exodus. Let me ask, while we're together, do you have any questions or comments or things that you've thought? The movie, The Ten Commandments. I love kind of old movies, period. And I love, not all, most kind of old Bible movies. It's just fascinating. The public used to have a taste for that, right? Like, oh, a movie about Moses and the Ten Commandments, we'll pack the house for that. That wouldn't fly today, so that's interesting. To me, it's interesting. Again, things like Moses, your hair. I laugh out loud, but it wasn't funny then. Like, they were like, he's radioactive almost, right? I love detecting the sub-themes. So in that one, I think there's a pretty clear, especially when Moses and Pharaoh are going back and forth, they really sound like Nikita Khrushchev having a conversation with Dwight Eisenhower about what's good in the world and what is freedom and what are we really about. Because Moses over and over says, the human spirit must be free. He says that kind of thing a lot. Well, that's not what Moses in the Bible, Moses would say, humans should be obedient to God, right? It's a very different kind of thing. So that's fun to see. Then it raises questions for me of what do we do today that to us sounds like, oh, that's God, but there's something under it that even we can't detect now, some bias that's creeping into it. Yeah. So, but the magnificent stage sets and all, it's just absolutely. There's a kid cartoon that I remember vaguely watching with my kids that was fun. Anyhow, yeah, good question. It's long. To me, it's not as good as Ben-Hur.
It's always around Easter.
It pops up around Easter, yeah. My favorite is Ben-Hur. I just love the Ben-Hur. Anyway, old movies. Lynn.
So, did I understand you correctly that when the Israelites were leaving Egypt and they got the gold jewelry from the Egyptians, and obviously God was going to use that for the tabernacle, so God had a hand in the fact that they were getting that jewelry from the Egyptians? I mean, were they just asking what?
In the story, as Exodus recounts it, so this is not a live documentary view of what happened, God tells the Israelites, go ask them for their jewels. And so they do. And the sense is the Egyptians are so terrified at that point, they're thinking this might buy them some time in life because the plagues are just way too much, right? But the gold isn't for them, oh, you can have nice jewelry now. It's for the tabernacle. And that's kind of one of those lessons, like whatever precious things we have, how do we reconceive that? That this is not maybe for my delight and enjoyment and adornment, but this actually is for God. How do I let that be? We're raising money to finish paying for this building. This is like a good lesson. Like, how do we? Anyhow, so yes, Danny.
You talked about them taking the gold and putting it in the tabernacle. What about the gold that Moses made them destroy the calf and eat it and drink it?
Yeah, that's so. In Exodus 32, you can spend a month on it. So part of it is after Moses comes down. Always in all the Bible, we tend to think, oh, it's all grace and mercy, and it is all grace and mercy. But yet there's some consequences. There's some justice in all of this. And so God prescribes this thing that you grind some of that gold down and you dissolve it in liquid. I don't know how that actually works, but that was the thing. And then you have to drink it, and whoever survives that. It is bizarre. I don't doubt that there was some ancient practice that's reflected there, but I don't know what to do with that. It's not a go thou and do likewise. Right? If your kids are difficult, grind some gold in water, have them drink it, see how they turn out. Right?
I thought that was just punishment for building the calf.
There's a clear punishment element to it. There's punishment in this story. There's a lot of punishment in the Old Testament. But there's a punishment in the New Testament. I mean, anyway, yeah. The Bible's got weird stuff, but it's what God wants us to read. So, what else? Anyone? Thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate it. And this will be on video. So we have a lot of you will see this on video later, and this will be on later. Monday at the same hour, Taylor Pride Barefoot and I are going to do a thing on John Wesley. She went on a pilgrimage with some clergy there and came back kind of on fire for Wesley. So we've worked up a program on that, which will be great fun. Anyhow, thank you all for coming.